So today we're gonna go over catfishing. When I say catfishing, I'm talking about tackle, rigs, knots, hooks. I'm pretty much gonna go through everything that I use when I go catfishing. I'm gonna show you guys how I rig it up, what knots I use, what gear I use, and a lot of this stuff is just personal preference. So, you know, just because you see it on this video doesn't mean that's how you have to do it to catch fish. So the first thing we're gonna talk about is the gear. I'm very simple when it comes to doing the catfish rigs. Not a lot of fancy gear used. You'll see what I mean here in a second. And again, I'm keeping this pretty basic, but really this is what I use. So feel free to comment, suggest anything that you think might help me out. Comment if this was helpful to you in any way. And yeah guys, let's dive right in. I've made my desk right here a little work area. I'm gonna lay out all the gear. We're gonna have some fun with this, and it's also gonna be pretty educational. So let's get started. All right, everybody. So here I've laid out pretty much everything that I use when making a catfish rig. We're just gonna go one by one real quick and kind of explain. Obviously, some of this stuff is self-explanatory, but we've got line here. Spider wire, I really like their braid. It has its purpose. I don't really use braid a lot. I'll get into that later. This 50-pound line I do not put on my reel. And it's cheap line. This is leader line that I use. And we got some Trilene big game, 30-pound, this neon green color. This is actually what I spool on my bigger catfish rods. It is a pretty heavy line compared to what most people use. And these are two types of swivels that I use. Just your basic one, you know, for Carolina rigging. And this 3-way leader. We'll get more into that as well. And I call these knot stoppers. I mean, they're slide sinker beads. For those of you that don't know their purpose, you'll find out in this video. And we have our hooks. We have a plain J hook. And what you'll see me use all the time, I mean, this is the only hook I use. I have this here for a reason. I'll explain that in a little bit here. And of course our rigs. I just call these drop shot sinkers, even though I know drop shot is like a bass term, but I use these a lot. You can see this one's been used. You can see it's curved. I probably pulled it out of the snag or something. And of course our egg slide sinkers. And these are our high vis floats. So now what I'm going to do is talk about hooks. This is probably the more in-depth one I'm going to talk about. And I have these in my tackle box, I think from a saltwater fishing trip I took. I never use these. Never. And I'll explain to you why I never used them. I'm always using circle hooks, okay? So the reason I do never use these hooks is because they just have a high probability of killing the fish that you meant to release. And of course a lot of people, well, I keep fish. Well, you know, if it's not a legal fish, you killed it for no reason, right? I'll explain to you why this kills fish and this for the most part does not. Alright, so for this demonstration I've got this little plastic cup. This is going to be the catfish. As funny as that sounds, okay? This is the catfish's mouth right here, right? So we got our J hook, you know, there's a piece of bait on here sitting on the bottom. Catfish comes up. Even the smallest catfish is very greedy. And they're going to swallow it. You know what I'm saying? They're going to put the whole thing in their mouth and start swimming off with it. So the catfish comes up, you know, eats the bait and starts swimming off with it. This hook is open-faced in its mouth, just like anywhere here, here, here. So the catfish is going to be hooked. It could even get hooked at this point, right up here in its throat, right? This is how you pull them up most of the time when you're using J hooks. All you see is line in their mouth. So then when you got the catfish up, you're trying to, you know, hurt it as less as you can. It's got its hook all the way down its throat like this. And if it's a smaller catfish, or maybe it hooks it really funny on the gills, that's a dead fish that you could have potentially saved by using a circle hook. So, this is how the circle hook works. It's laying on the bottom, you know, it's got a piece of bait on it. Catfish swims up, puts the hook in its mouth, and starts swimming off. This hook is rounded. I cannot hook it anywhere inside its throat, right? You see how it's rounded off like that? The point of the hook is actually inside of the circle. So he swims off, he's not getting hooked. So let's just say he grabs this bait, he's swimming off, the hook starts doing this number right here, and boom. This is where the hook point will hook that catfish. Right on the side of the mouth, hook is completely out of its throat. I mean, of course, you're still hooking a fish up. Yeah, just like that. And that's why circle hooks are what I use. It's not only for catfish. It worked for almost any other fish. I mean, sometimes, which this is very rare, but if you have a piece of live bait on here and a bass bites it, it could potentially get hooked in its throat. Very unlikely though. I mean, I can run this hook up and down my hand unless I do this number right here. You got to get that point on the inside right there, right? So that's probably the number one emphasis I'm going to have on this video. If you guys go out catfishing with live bait or anything, you know, use circle hooks. It's the best option for the fish. That's a big emphasis. Anyways, I don't want to bore you guys too much with all these type of specifics. I know most of you already know this type of stuff. So let's get to our knots. Okay, the first knot I'm going to be tying, try to remember because the rest of my rigs are pretty much anchored on this knot right here. This is really basic. I'm sure a lot of you already know this knot. It's called a polymer knot. So what we're going to do first is grab our line like this. Just fold it in itself. Pinch up here. I'm going to grab our circle hook. And we're going to feed the loop that we just made. This is really hard to do. I'm looking at the camera, not the actual. Okay, there we go. Boom, just like that, right? So the hook is sitting in between this loop that we had made on the same line. Now, we're going to wrap this loop within itself. And it's going to come through the other side like this. Right, we're going to pull it out a little bit. And this excess loop right here is going to go around our hook. And this whole time I've been hanging on to this little tag line on our extra line. And we're just going to pull this tight. And that is our polymer knot. A very strong knot. I use it a lot. It's really simple. You saw how easy that's really one of the only reasons I use it so much is it's so fast and simple. Okay, for our next knot, I'm going to need you guys' help because this is actually the knot my dad taught me when I was first learning to fish when I was a little kid. And I actually don't know what it's called. I imagine just like every other knot, it's named a lot of different things. So if you guys want to comment below and tell me what you guys call this knot if you know, that'd be really cool. We're just going to call it a twist knot. You'll see why I call it a twist knot here in a minute. So we're not going to loop it like we did the polymer knot. We're just sticking our line straight through the eyelet of the hook. And then we're going to clamp it together like this. And you're going to twist your hook. I like to twist it about 5 or 6 times. So there we got a couple of twists in our line. That's why I call it the twist knot. Like I said, comment what you guys call this knot. And you see there's a little loop at the end of our hook. We're going to stick the end of our line, our tag line, into that loop. So it looks just like this, and once we feed that line through the loop that was closest to the hook, we're going to feed it back up through this loop. Now what you want to do is pull tight on it. And there it is. This is a really strong knot. It could just be kind of tricky to do. You know, obviously the polymer knot is a lot easier, and I use this sometimes. I'll show you guys when we start building rigs when I use it and all that. But yeah, that's our twist knot. Okay, and the last knot I'm going to demonstrate today is a snell knot or knotless knot. The only time I use this is if I have leader line on my rig, and we'll show you guys that in a second. But pretty much what you do, and this is when this offset eyelet that I was talking to you about earlier comes to play in this circle hook. So we're going to feed our line right through our eyelet. I like to put it about almost at the end of the shank. just like that. And you want to leave it right there where it's at. We're not going to use this end of the line again. I'm going to come with what's left over of my line and start wrapping it. This can be kind of tricky. So, yep. Start wrapping it around my hook just like that. As many times as you feel you need to. I do about 5 or 6 or 7, right? Okay. And then once you have it right there, I like to pinch it so it doesn't come all loose. And with the end of our line, all we're going to do is feed it right back through this eyelet. I like to grab it. This is why I like to grab a circle hook and you just tug at it. Now you can see that is a pretty knot. It's a knotless knot because, you know, technically there's no knot on it. And slip knot, do not cut this tag. This tag line, do not cut it. This is actually a little long for my preference. I would have liked it maybe halfway through the shank. Because what happens is, you see how loose that knot looks right now? When I pull it, it gets really tight. And you want to leave this tag line because if a really big fish gets on there, it'll start slipping that tag line. And, you know, as the knot gets tighter and tighter, this tag line comes shorter and shorter. I've never had it happen real bad. But if you cut it all the way down here, all it takes is for that tag line to get past, you know, where you twisted it and the knot comes loose. This is a very strong, you see how it came loose again until you start tightening it up. This is a really strong knot. So, I hope you guys remember those 3 knots because now we're actually going to build some rigs. We're going to go through 3 rigs, simplest to the most complicated, I believe. And oh, you know what? I almost forgot. Let's talk about braid real quick before we start building some rigs. I'm actually not going to build a rig with braid in this video. Just for demonstration purposes, I'm going to use that high-vis line. Pretty much the basics of it, what you guys have to know, is you will never be able to snap braid. Like if this was braid, you could never stretch braid to the point where it snaps. I mean, you can, but it is very difficult. But the thing about braid is any little tiny sharp surface, whether it's a rock, you get snagged on somebody else's hook, with the lightest touch, it's cut. A lot of bass fishermen, let's say you're fishing in some tall grass. You want to use braid. When you know there's no rocks or anything that's going to cut it just like I did, but you need that strength to pull a bass out of grass. In the ocean, obviously there's a lot of rocks, but if you're doing like shore fishing on the beach or something, braid is a good option. You can fit so much more of it on your reel, and you don't have to worry about anything sharp, you know, cutting it. So that's the thing with braid. It's really nice stuff. I have maybe 2 rods set up with braid, but when you're fishing the Tennessee River like I do all the time, very rocky areas, you guys saw what I just did. I mean, it takes nothing. I'm literally not even putting pressure on this at all, and it's just cut. As strong as this stuff is, any sharp edge is going to cut it just like that. Mono or fluoro or anything like that, it's quite the opposite. It'll never be able, I mean, this is 30 pounds, so I can't do it, but it'll never be able to stretch as much as braid can. A fish will actually break you off of this, but it is very resistant to sharp things. This is a pretty sharp knife, but you guys saw that. It is very resistant to rocks and getting snagged and stuff like that, right? Anyways, let's get to tying some rigs up. Alright, our first rig is a free line rig. This is the simplest rig, but I do use it very often, so it's worth remembering. Pretty much, we're going to grab our circle hook, and we're going to do a polymer knot on it. Of course, when we're actually fishing with this, we're going to cut our tag off. And this is a free line rig. Obviously, it's called free line because there's no weight, there's no swivel, there's no float or bobber. You're free lining this. I use it in very still water, like if I'm fishing Camp Jordan Pond or a lake that there's not much wind, where you're just going to let that bait drift down to the bottom as naturally as possible. I also use it with live bait, kind of let that bait whether it's a shiner or a bluegill, swim around. It's going to look injured because obviously it has a hook through it. It's going to attract fish. Don't use it in the river too much because obviously the current is very strong and the current is just going to keep pushing your bait on top of the water where the catfish aren't, usually. So yeah, guys, this is a free line. Obviously very simple. You just tie the hook onto your line. That's it. Alright, our next rig is going to be a drop shot rig. We're going to get one of our drop shot weights here, weight of your choice, whether it's heavier or a little lighter than this. And I actually like to use a twist knot on this because that way I'm ensuring that the knot is at the very top of this weight, and this weight is going to sink right on the bottom like that. And you guys see what I mean by that knot is sitting right on top of this drop shot weight. So this bait is going to fall straight down like that. And now, one of the advantages of using a polymer knot, okay? Let's get our circle hook, right? I like to go about 6 inches, maybe a little more from the, from the end of our weight. The polymer knot, this could still be on your rod and you don't have to, tie another line on or put a leader on this, right? Because all we're doing is pinching this and we're going to do a polymer knot on this circle hook. Now, the only thing you want to make sure you do when you're tying this circle hook onto the rig, but you want to make sure your hook is facing up. Because if it's facing down, it's going to start interfering with your line and all that type of stuff, get all types of tangled up and stuff. So if you guys watch my catfishing videos, you'll see that this is actually like my go-to rig for catfishing. I just like the fact that my bait is suspended about, 6 inches to a foot off the bottom of the water, and it just prevents a lot of snags and stuff like that. I really like using this, and a quick variation of this is, let's say, this is sitting like this. A lot of people say like, oh, when the fish comes up and bites this, they'll feel the weight on the bottom. The fish will shy away. I just like to grab my hook and line like this and just do a simple loop knot, just like any regular knot. And put it right there. Now this is what you have. This is actually what you'll see me use almost 100% of the time. I'm going to show you one more variation of this drop shot rig for catfishing, and then we're going to move on to the Carolina rig. Alright, so the last variation I'm going to show you guys of this drop shot rig is very simple. A lot of the same stuff I just showed you, except for one thing. We're going to feed this hook through before we tie our drop shot weight on. Always remember you want your hook facing up. So we're going to feed this through the line. Alright, so I've tied the drop shot weight on here just with a twist knot like we did on the other drop shot rigs. And from here, this is where it gets a little different from the rest of the drop shot rigs I've showed y'all. This hook is actually still free right now, so what we're going to do is just grab it. Take some line with us, just like the second variation I showed you guys. And just run a simple loop knot through it. Just like that. So now what we have is pretty much the same setup as our last rig that I showed, except this hook can now move freely up and down this loop. It gives us the bait a more natural presentation where the current is flowing a bit and it wants to go up or down. And I don't use this too often because I like my hook to be, right here if I had a polymer knot right here. But sometimes it's useful because this little slack doesn't seem like much at first, but a really shy fish is going to come up to this. It can take it wherever it wants and it won't realize it's hooked until it gets a bit of tension off that weight. So this just gives it that little bit extra free play that we talked about on a free line rig. So that's it for our drop shot rigs. Our last and final rig is going to be the most common catfish rig that everybody's probably seen before. I'm going to show you guys 3 variations of the Carolina rig. So let's get started on that one. Alright, so this is everything we're going to need to set up our Carolina rig. We're going to start off by tying our leader. This is 50-pound line. Usually I like to use very thick mono for my leader, just because we talked about before, the abrasion and resistance of this mono is very strong, and most likely if a catfish like a flathead is going to take you in a hole where there's lots of rock, you want at least a foot to 6 inches of this really strong leader to, ensure the chances of you landing that fish and not it breaking off. So, like I said, even when this is a leader that we're going to tie on, this is not connected to our rod right now, right? We're going to take our circle hook and we're going to tie a snell knot on it that I showed you guys earlier in the video. Okay, so now that we have a snell knot tied on to our circle hook on our 50-pound leader, all we're going to do is take a swivel and we're going to tie it at the other end of our leader. Polymer knot, because a twist knot is kind of tricky when you're working with line that's this thick and heavy. Alright, so I have tied the polymer knot onto my swivel and my circle hook is tied on with a snell knot. So this is our leader right here, 50-pound line. We're going to set this aside and add our weights and our beads to our main line. So this is our main line right here. We're pretending that this is actually hooked up to our rod, of course. So what we're going to do is slip our sinkers on here. And of course, you can add as much weight or as little weight as you think is needed depending on the current or the depth you want to reach. And this is where a lot of people think, these are pretty fancy. We're going to add these beads after we add our weights on. I like to add about 3. It just depends how much weight I have on there. And I'll explain to you what these guys actually do once we tie our leader on. And there we have it. This is a Carolina rig. Now this is brand new line, so that's why it's spooled up. After a couple times this would all be straightened out. I do have about 10 inches of leader on here, and like I said, I'm going to explain what these beads are exactly for. These beads are pretty much preventing our sinkers from hitting our knot, which could possibly weaken the knot. A bunch of times of doing this could possibly loosen your knot, and these are just a little bit of plastic beads protecting that knot from the heavy, banging up against our egg sinkers. Now, I have a few opinions about this rig, and I do use it often, not more than my drop shot rig. The theory of a Carolina rig is that because you have your egg sinkers here, your bead stoppers, your swivel, you're going to cast this out. It might land something like this, right? For example, something like this with your main line all hung up, right? You're going to start reeling in the line just like that until you feel this bump. When you feel this bump, you've reached your leader. Then what you can do is, let's say you have a piece of bluegill or anything on here. You can leave it at the bottom just like this, or you can pull your drag out and let a little bit of line out, letting this supposedly float to wherever you think you need it. A lot of rods from the reel to the first eyelet is about 1.5 feet or something like that. So you can kind of measure how much line you're letting out, and this will float up. Now, the idea is great. The only problem I have, and I can't prove this, obviously, I don't have like underwater footage, is let's say there's a twig or something, or a little tiny rock or something, and your egg sinkers lay like this. You'll straighten them out, and if there's anything stopping this, a twig, maybe you're in some mud, you're not going to be able to let this line out like you want it to, or like it's supposed to, unless you set it up like I'm going to show you guys next, which is our second variation of the Carolina rig. So here we go. I've just finished tying the knots on my leader and on my main line. I've got a free moving float on my leader line. So now what I was talking about earlier, when I let line out, even if there's a little twig or some mud, this float should be enough to push this leader out and do what I want, okay? Now, of course, if you don't want your leader to just keep rising and rising, that's up to you setting your drag and all that on your reel. I really like this rig, guys. I'm going to show you guys one more variation of this Carolina rig, and that'll be it for this video. Alright everybody, for this last variation of the Carolina rig, we're actually going to incorporate something called a double snell knot. It's not different at all from the regular snell knot I already showed you. We're just going to do 2 of them on the same line, and there's going to be one thing different with the second one we do, and I'll show you guys that in a second. But for now, just take your leader line and let's put a snell knot on this circle hook. Alright guys, so I just finished tying my first snell knot on this circle hook, and what's going to make this a double snell knot is this, okay? We're going to grab our second hook, and we're actually going to feed the line backwards into this circle hook, just like that. We're going to come as close as you want to this first hook. I don't like to go past it like this. I just like the shank to be almost touching, right? So from here, we're just going to pretend this back hook doesn't exist, and we're going to do another snell knot. So there's my double snell knot right here. As you can see, I've still left a little bit of tag on this first hook like I explained to you guys when I showed you how to tie this. And this is a double snell knot. And of course, we got our main line right here with our egg sinkers and beads. Alright, so here we have it, guys. The third variation of the Carolina rig I wanted to show you. And obviously what makes the Carolina rig is just this simple leader setup, right? And here's our double snell knot hook. So you're probably wondering what I would use this for. I don't use it often, but mostly what I do use it for is when, for example, in the winter when it's kind of rough to catch bait and you want to use chicken breast or chicken liver or even hot dogs or something like that. Those baits do not stay on the hook very well, at least as well as fresh bait does. So a double snell knot, you know how bad a piece of liver is. We can grab that piece of liver and just keep wrapping it around this hook and this hook, and you can either have them facing both one side or the other side. It definitely ups your chances of hooking up to that catfish, and these snell knots are really tight, so this is just a great little setup. I hope this video taught somebody something, and I hope that even the more experienced anglers enjoyed the video. Thanks for watching, everybody. Don't forget to like, share, and subscribe, and stay tuned for next week's episode of Everyday Angler.